Okay. All right. So I think we are live. I think we have people joining. So we give folks a few seconds here to join. All right. So I think we're live. So thanks, Finn. So I think we're live. Everybody, thank you for joining. You joined the Emerging Tech Hubs and Future of AI, sponsored by Purpose Jobs. My name is Jibreel Lockhart. I'm the founder of Petram Analytics, and I will be your host today. But before I share about the panelists and our backgrounds, a quick shout out to Purpose Jobs. If you're not familiar with Purpose Jobs, they are your go-to tech storyteller and community builder. Said in another way, they really connect talent with great companies and they help great companies build their brands. I've worked with them for the past about 3 years and have been really pleased with all of the great talent that they've sent our way. So thank you, Purpose Jobs, for sponsoring this great conversation and putting together a wonderful panel of experts from across various industries that are going to share with us what they believe is the future of AI. So just a couple of quick housekeeping items before we get started. Please use the chat. So you guys may not be familiar with StreamYard, but this is connected through all of the live streaming platforms. So if you just put in where you're dialed in from, so what city you're dialed in from, that at least allows us to give you a shout out for us to know that you're there, to make this more interactive. Second thing is, don't just put that there. If you have a question that you've been just dying to get an answer to, or that you already know you want to get answered, go ahead and put it in now. That way we can make sure that we get to your questions. We're going to try to incorporate the questions into the dialogue to make this really interactive. I know we have about 200 RSVPs. So I think as you start to see the names pop up and the cities pop up, there's quite a few people on. And we do want to get to everyone's questions. We can't promise that we will, but we will try if you put it into the chat. So that's a little bit of housekeeping. So the topic today is the future of AI. We all have heard tons about ChatGPT and OpenAI and Bard and all of the new startups. Thousands of new companies have been spawned just in the last several months. But AI has been around for a long time. And our panelists here work in different industries, mostly here in the Midwest. And they have some fascinating ways that their companies have taken AI and applied it to various business problems. And I want to give them each an opportunity to answer the host of questions. Before we do that, I'm going to let them go around and do a quick intro. If you can tell us your name, what you do at the company that you're at, and why you're excited to be here to talk about the future of AI. So I'll start with you, Vijay.
Hi, thank you, Jibreel. So that was a great introduction. So my name is Vijay. I work for this company called KLA, which makes equipment that is used in semiconductor manufacturing. So I've been with them for 23 years. So I was like 6 years old when I started with them. And right now I'm a director of AI for KLA's second headquarters, which is located in Ann Arbor. And my responsibilities here are software and algorithms and everything that doesn't involve the hardware aspects of the systems that we sell.
Awesome. Rehgan.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rehgan. I'm co-founder and CEO of AlignAI out of Columbus, Ohio. I've been in the machine learning space for the last decade, so I'm really excited to talk about the last 6 months and the whirlwind that everybody's experiencing with AI and the excitement that we're seeing. So excited to hear from questions for people tuning in.
Awesome. Ryan.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Ryan Shondell. I'm the VP of Engineering and Product Management at Path Robotics. We're located in Columbus, Ohio. So we design, manufacture, and deliver autonomous welding robots as a service. So we use our custom vision systems, deep learning networks, and adaptive algorithms to imbue off-the-shelf robotics with human caliber intelligence to improve manufacturing.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ryan. Finn.
Hey guys, good afternoon. My name is Finn Elliott. I'm the head of products at RoboTire out of Plymouth, Michigan. We are automating vehicle maintenance using industrial robotic arms guided by computer vision. So we were founded in 2019 and launched in 4 systems. We've launched 4 systems in stores so far. So we're really excited about AI. Our robots wouldn't move without being guided by computer vision and machine learning models, right? So without AI, we would be nowhere. And as it advances, it's only going to help us advance our product. So really excited to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Finn. And so I guess I'll share a little bit about Petram. So Petram Analytics is a boutique consultancy that focuses on unlocking the power of customer data for retail brands. So we use some AI and machine learning models to do predictive modeling for next best behavior, next best product, the things that you, I'm sure, all know that Amazon does to better predict what you might be likely to purchase next. So we do that kind of work for smaller retail brands to kind of democratize some of the AI and data intelligence across smaller companies. So that's what we do. So let's dive in. So we have a fantastic panel. I'm going to start the first question here, and I'm going to ask everyone to answer this question. It's just a simple one. What impact has AI had on your business and with customers? Now, I want you to kind of couch that in, what your business does more specifically, but I just want to kind of get a round robin from everybody on, what impact AI has had on your business. Now, I'll start again with you, Vijay, and then go around in the same order.
Okay. So I think I briefly mentioned that my company does equipment that is used in computer chip manufacturing. And it's a fairly big company in a big industry, right? And for us, we have always been interested in image processing, because what we do is high-speed imaging of computer chips and then analyzing all those images to find defects in them. That's roughly what the company does. And to do that, you need high-end image processing solutions, which we've always built over the last 20 years, right? And starting about 10 years ago, deep learning became a very exciting option for us to explore in terms of a solution to our image processing needs. And because the industry itself has such rapid technological advances, we need a silver bullet every 3 years, right? And AI kind of solutions have been that silver bullet in the last 5-6 years, and I think it'll continue for the next decade or so.
Awesome. Great.
Yeah, so we focus on helping enterprise companies build, adopt, and govern their policies and procedures for data and AI. And what we mean by that is essentially helping organizations put the right standards in place at their company and create efficiencies, create consistency, create auditability, governance, and have the ability for individuals whose jobs are changing rapidly to be able to adapt to some of those new standards. So often, for the longest time, when we were talking about machine learning, we would be referencing technical individuals inside of the company. And there's a crazy stat out there that 90% of models that get built never get used, and there's a reason for that. There's some technical challenges that are getting solved, which are really interesting. But there's always a people component to this, because people need to use models, systems need to take outputs and do something with them. There's a whole user experience element to machine learning and system design, and we are highly focused on helping companies set up those standards appropriately and adopt them. And then the govern part, which is really important, because there's a lot of policy being passed globally and at the state level to try to help protect consumers and individuals against unintended or potentially intended consequences from machine learning. And so we're highly focused on understanding what industry standards are being put out there and what policies are getting passed at the global level and what implications that will have on large enterprise organizations.
Fantastic. That's important work. Thanks, Rehgan. Ryan.
So Path was founded about 5 years ago with AI at its core in everything that we do. We're really focused right now on welding in the manufacturing world. And welding is a sub-millimeter precision industry in a world with really high part variation. So the metal's fabricated slightly differently, has slight defects. It's a very high skill, tough job that takes a lot of experience to be able to adapt to this kind of variation. Humans do it all the time with brains and eyes and hands. after enough years, you just get really good at it. But there's more than 400,000 welding jobs that are open, and the average age of a welder is 57 years old. So we're not filling those jobs any faster in U.S. manufacturing. So we use AI to help see and understand the process of welding so that we can begin to help companies continue to grow while people retire or kind of move on from the welding industry. So it imbues that kind of intelligence in a space that we can't really deterministically, logically create algorithms for.
That's awesome. That's a really amazing stat. There's 400,000 welding jobs, and the average age is 57. So definitely a need for technology and innovation. So we should come back to that, Finn.
Yeah, kind of similar to Ryan, we use AI and machine learning to understand where things are in order to drive the robot to the correct position. So like I said, RoboTire is focusing on vehicle maintenance, on automating vehicle maintenance, with the first path being wheel and tire changes. Mm-hmm. So we use machine learning to guide robots toward lug nuts and wheels and hub surfaces and things like that. As AI accelerates, we're going to be able to deal better with issues like light reflections in the cell and all these things that you wouldn't necessarily see, for example, in a factory setting. But since there are more people working in the space, we're able to get better access to better machine learning models, for instance, right? And better resources to train new models and things like that.
Yeah, better resources to train new models is so important, to have the data to actually train your models well. Can you talk about some of the tools that RoboTire uses, just in terms of thinking about some of the people that are on this call that are interested in getting into more of tech and AI fields, just so that we are aware, of what kinds of things and tools that RoboTire tends to use?
For sure. So, not to get too deep into the weeds, but I'll give a quick rundown of hardware and software. For the camera, we use a Zivid M70, a Zivid 2 M70, which is a structured light camera. So it's not stereoscopic. It tends to deal really well with light reflections in the cell. So we've settled on that camera a while ago, and it's been working great for us. We use YOLO V4, I think, for our ML model training. And then for all annotations, we're using CVAT. So, sometimes we're now doing well, but sometimes earlier on in startups, I'm sure all of you guys have had fun times with raising capital. And the nice thing about CVAT is that it's open source. So we were able to launch CVAT, and it's worked great for us. So as we've expanded, just increased the space on our local server to do all of our local annotations. That's a rundown of our ML vision related stuff.
Awesome. Vijay, Rehgan, and Ryan, would you mind just sharing for our more technical folks on the call, kind of what your stack looks like, what tools you use? I'm sure there's a wide range, but I think it might be interesting.
Yeah, so I can go first. So I think we predominantly use Google's TensorFlow for most of our software side of things, right? So since we have to ship our products, there is a value in us just choosing one thing and sticking with it. So even though like other frameworks are now becoming popular, we have stayed with TensorFlow, and there's no good reason for us to shift away from that right now. We do have a unique problem in the sense that our machines generate images at tremendous data rates, like 50 gigabytes a second, right, which is more than all of the worldwide users of Facebook upload into Facebook. It's faster than that. It's probably 3 or 4 times faster than that. So because of that, a lot of the normal off-the-shelf systems actually don't work for us. So both on the hardware and software side, we do a lot of custom stuff that's more tailored to our application. So it can do one thing, but it can do it much better than off-the-shelf solutions can do for us. So we do a lot of that as well.
Got it. Great. Rehgan?
Yeah, so our platform obviously deals with a lot of content and content generation and content analysis. So different vector databases, leveraging the APIs that OpenAI has put out there for embeddings and things like that. And so we also have the ability to analyze and understand the entire technology ecosystem of all of our customers as well. So we see tons and tons of patterns that different companies are implementing. I've actually run across a new programming language that I know a lot of people are starting to play with called Mojo. That is kind of like a Python derivative that is used to basically help with performance, which if you've done machine learning in Python for a long time, you understand that the performance element is really challenging. And so I think there's a lot of really interesting infrastructure advancements that are happening, but also on the efficiency of the programming language and compilers and things like that too. So yeah, lots of interesting trends that we're noticing in the enterprise of people trying to adopt new technologies in this space to support large language models, of course, and then all of your very typical enterprise platforms that have been used for a long time, for several years, that are starting to create advancements in terms of functionality to support large language models as well.
Are there any that you would call out to say, hey, if you're interested in getting involved in the tech space, that you should really double down and learn, because they seem to be, pervasive in some of the companies that you see that are growing and doing good work?
Yeah, I mean, the cloud platforms are really doubling down on trying to provide lots of functionality in what they have today. So you can't really go wrong with learning the different cloud platforms and the tools that they have available. Like Mosaic ML is a really interesting platform that is helping developers on the creating new large language models and fine-tuning large language models. But yeah, we have, just to state this clearly, we don't have any specific relationships with tooling vendors. So, but those are just some interesting ones that we've come across.
Gotcha. And then Ryan, I'll throw it to you about tools, but maybe if you can just talk about, challenges that you guys have faced just with growing the company, leveraging AI, that people may not be familiar with, that might be helpful as well, just to transition to another topic.
Yeah, ideally they're the same. We're using some tools to overcome our challenges that otherwise, why are we investing in a tool? So the one big piece is the annotation of data. Obviously, if you don't have annotated data, you can't build good models against that. I have a 4-year-old, so he learns the wrong thing very easily, just like or models will learn the wrong thing very easily if you have bad data or poorly annotated data. So there are services like Labelbox that you can kind of offset the annotation of that data, so you don't have to spend your kind of time and effort on that. You can keep focused on differentiated value and teach sort of outsource managed service on how to annotate that data. Another thing that we really think about is the performance, as Rehgan alluded to. We'll believe the 35,000x faster Mojo. Your mileage may vary on that one, but a lot of what we do, we have to get material through very quickly. We're measured on our ability to kind of continue production parts moving through the system, and the longer we take, the slower that our customers move. So we think about things like CUDA, for example. So CUDA is NVIDIA's framework for actually moving compute onto the GPU. It's useful for us in that it's C++ and Python. We can attach to the GPUs. So when we have to be lower level, either because we want the performance or we're interfacing with lower level systems, welding systems, PLCs, those kind of more hardware connected things, we might be in C++. If we're a little higher in the stack, we might be in Python. But either way, we can use CUDA to leverage a similar approach to taking advantage of the GPU.
Gotcha. Before I dive deeper into this infrastructure and tools and things that you guys are doing, I want to kind of pull back for some of the audience that may not be as familiar with the technical side of what you guys are doing. And we start talking about all of the various platforms that we're using. Could you just maybe tell us, and I'll keep this with Ryan, and I want to go back to Rehgan, because you said that you're dealing with governance and standards, and there's a lot of fear about AI and what it means, based on just what we've seen in the movies, and I think that what would be really interesting is to kind of hear some of the things that really excite all of you about not just what's available now, but what you guys see into the future. And then we'll come back around to some of the technical questions, but just kind of help the rest of the audience here kind of understand some of your thoughts about the future of AI and how it's going to impact your business, how it's going to impact our lives, right? So I know you mentioned welding and how that's changing. Can you talk a little bit more, double click on that point, and then I'll go back around.
Yeah, we think about AI in the movies. It's blow up the world is number one, right? Steal all of our jobs is number two, right? It's always the sort of bad stuff from the top down. One of the things we're seeing is it does, like, there are some jobs that it just is beginning to minimize the effectiveness, but in the same way that any other piece of tech has done. What has Google and Wikipedia done for the research, kind of data research space? It's really changed the name of that game. We've got things like ChatGPT that are changing I just want to find some information or structure it slightly differently. Yeah, those jobs are gonna alter or change, but AI is a thing that's going to empower people who understand it like a tool to be able to do that job better, faster, more efficiently. In the same way we think about manufacturing. Manufacturing is not going away. Welding is not going away. The need for those companies is not going away, but the labor force is going away. So AI is allowing us to enable those companies to stay in business, to thrive, to grow their presence in the US, to really kind of reignite manufacturing in that space in a job where people are beginning to bow out. It's difficult, it's hot, it can be very challenging conditions, tough to find welders. And so AI is enabling entire companies to survive and thrive in the future, where without that, the lack of a labor pool could cause those companies to actually crumble and everybody's job is at risk. So we see that kind of shoring up the opportunity space for manufacturing.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic point. And I think welding, I think we can all say that there's not a lot of kids coming out of college that want to go into welding. So you're actually creating, or would you say reigniting, the manufacturing industry. And I think it's so important here in Detroit, where I'm at, all across the country, really. Vijay, curious your thoughts. Just kind of Ryan, his point of view is that this just kind of helps enable and can reignite some industries. Do you have the same point of view or different perspective?
Yeah, so I want to echo Ryan regarding the hype around this and things like that. It kind of reminds me of the first real thing called artificial intelligence that was discovered. This was back in the 1950s, right? At that time, it was called a perceptron, and it came out of the army, actually. And that time, there were newspaper articles and interviews which talk about how this perceptron was supposed to be this artificial intelligence that can be shot off into space, and it's going to go and create colonies for humans elsewhere. Right? So, it's hard to say how much of this is just hype and how much of this is going to be reality, right? But I'm really kind of not thinking that an AI system is that easily going to be a decision maker for our lives, right? That's where most of the fear comes into play, right? It's going to be an advisor, it's going to be a helper, but I don't think it's going to be that easily a decision maker. So you can see how it panned out in things like radiology, for example, right? Reading an X-ray chart, AI system can even today do better than doctors, right? But there are regulations and rules around it, and we're not going to just let an AI system unassisted just make those decisions for us in terms of whether somebody has cancers or not, right? It's going to help doctors make sure they don't make a mistake, but it's not going to replace the doctor, right? So in a lot of contexts, when you look at it the right way, I think the dangers are not as big as what you might imagine. So on balance, I think we should be more excited than worried about these AI systems.
So Rehgan, I'd like you to respond to that, because I feel like there's a hidden risk there, in that there may be systems that are set up where the doctor is supposed to make the decision, the expert is supposed to make the final call, but we know human nature, and human nature is what drives high school kids to use ChatGPT to write their entire essay, right? And so to kind of opt out of the decision making and just rely on the AI to do the work. And so I'm curious, Rehgan, about, in terms of where you sit, thinking about standards and governance and unintended consequences of putting AI tools in people's hands. What do you see as the future? And maybe you can expand on some of the risk in things that you've seen, stories that you've seen or dealt with that may inform how we should think about the future of AI.
Yeah, we've been dealing with issues with AI for years and years and years. So all of the social media platforms that have testified and talking about what data they're using, and we think about these filter bubbles in social media and the type of impact that's had on society. So, AI has been having an impact on society for a while now. And I think it's always important to think about the context of the implications as it stands. Take AI out of the system. So a lot of people think that there's a ton of new policy that needs to get put in place around AI, which in some cases that's true because it is more complex. So policy to understand, like, do we want to enforce transparency? Do we want to enforce auditability for companies that are building models, and the impact that may have on consumers? But when we think about it, if you're looking at some of the policies being passed around hiring practices and leveraging AI for that, these are basic discrimination laws that already exist and that we have to monitor these models for adherence against anyway. And so a lot of companies today are avoiding high risk use cases of AI. So a lot of people are thinking about what are the consistent tasks that we have to accomplish today that are also low risk. And from that perspective, AI works really well. And I always like to use, like, ChatGPT is most useful if you already know the answer, because it tends to do things like hallucinate, which gives you information that you might believe is to be true, but is not actually true or factual. We've been dealing with information challenges and fact checking and truth issues for a number of years now. This does make things more complicated. And so I think there's going to be a lot more policy in place from that perspective. So when you think about what GDPR did for data governance and data privacy, and people's ownership of their own data, the right to be forgotten, things like that, this had a drastic impact on companies. They had to spend a lot of money to make sure that they were compliant. You get highly fined. There's obviously a lot that has been in the news recently. I won't call them out specifically, but one of the largest fines from GDPR just happened. And I think we'll start to see very similar paradigms with AI as well. So if you're a vendor building tools in this space, you have to be able to prove that you are compliant, and then also prove that you're able to explain why your model is giving certain outputs. And I think that's going to be really important for companies to adopt. So, we've been having the ethics conversation for the last probably almost decade now, and
could you share one of the stories that you feel comfortable sharing, just to kind of inform the audience on some of the areas they may not be as familiar with around governance and AI?
Yeah, so Amazon built a resume tool that evaluated resumes of candidates and was actually filtering out women, not on purpose. It wasn't part of the design, but it started filtering out candidates based on the training data set that it was given. So if you have a lot of really successful men inside of a company, it's going to look for very specific attributes that might be specific to that individual. So for example, the model was deprioritizing candidates that went to all women colleges, for example. And so there's these unintended consequences that start to happen where they didn't design it to be that way, but based on their training data set or an attribute that they didn't think would heavily weight the outcome of the model in that direction, you start to see some of these issues. And the only way to know if that's an issue is to actually run it and monitor it and try to understand why the model is making certain decisions. And today, not a lot of companies have a very robust mechanism to monitor and put explainability and auditability in place to do that. So they ultimately decided to get rid of the tool and to not use it. They were trying to make iterations on it over time, and it just didn't seem like it was a feasible pursuit for them. So they ended up shutting it down. But that's a very publicly known example that you can Google and look into.
Awesome. So those are a lot of really good points there. Finn, I haven't come around to you in terms of your perspective or point of view on, like, the future and the fear that exists around what AI is going to do to people's jobs. So I'd like to give you a chance to talk about that or follow up on Rehgan's point, or Vijay, Ryan, maybe after Finn, if you guys want to follow up on some of the points that Rehgan mentioned. I think there's a lot out there in terms of governance and guidance and ways that we are learning to interact with AI that you guys might want to share as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're putting a big 200 kilogram payload, 6-axis robotic arm in very public sight, right? Think of like a place like a discount tire. Not only are the people using it seeing the arm and seeing effectively the outcome of artificial intelligence and machine learning on the industry, but customers are looking through the window and seeing it right in front of them. So very often we get a bunch of comments in regards to, oh, you guys are taking people's jobs away. I mean, I'm sure Ryan has a very, I'm sure, similar situation going on. And we're saying, no, we understand your point, but we are serving to an industry that is not only underserved in the labor market, but is continuing to get worse. So it's kind of a hard sell from time to time. In regards to the fear factor, right? I'd say since our arms are very large, there is more fear of just the motion of the arm itself than there is of the fact that we're using machine learning models to guide the robot to the right position, right?
Right. Huge robot arm. What's it going to do?
Right. Exactly. So I guess on the bright side, when it comes to robot overlords, et cetera, our robot is bolted into the concrete with 350 foot-pounds. Unless somehow it figures out a way to unbolt itself from the ground and like grow wheels, then there's no risk of anything weird happening, right? But
there are lots of wheels around. Its job is to put wheels on. So
that's a good point. We may have to reconsider that fear. But long story short, if something doesn't work, if something is bad in one of our ML models, for instance, for lug nut guidance, right, for removing a lug nut from the vehicle using the robot arm, we're going to damage the vehicle. So the robot's not doing itself any good. Let's just put it that way. Or the ML model is not doing itself any good. That's why whenever we retrain a model, we go through every image. So every image that goes in that's new to the model is going through our annotation program. We're looking at the bounding boxes that have been created by the existing ML model that's about to be retrained, and then we adjust if we need to. Now, as our model has gotten better and better, the majority of the images that we feed to the model don't need any adjustment to the annotations that have already been created. But that's been a pretty good thing that's happened recently. I'm sure you guys that are annotating for models have gone through the pain of sorting through tens of thousands of photos. So
there's some real fears, like there's the Hollywood style fears, but the one thing that I really think about in terms of the fear is like the abdication of accountability for the outcome. It's almost like the dog ate my homework version of AI, to just say, well, I don't know, like the model just did it, right? You can't blame me. I just, like, it was just the model. It was just the AI. It was just a robot. It was just the whatever. And I think about that even in kind of a small scale term of just like a software developer using GitHub Copilot, for example, and it just wrote some code, and that code is fundamentally flawed or low performance or introduced a security issue or something. And they'd say, I don't know. I don't actually know how it works. I just like asked Copilot to write me something, and it wrote something. And I think that's a thing we really stress about. You're not abdicating your responsibility for the outcome. You still have to understand what is happening. You still have to be responsible for the end state being correct. This is just a mechanism that gets you to that end state in a different way, a faster way, maybe a more efficient way. But I do see that as a risk, as people kind of abdicating some portion of accountability and just sort of shrugging their shoulders and pointing at the box.
That's a great point.
I'll add to that too. Like I always talk about in a lot of the machine learning use cases that we've seen. In fact, some of the most interesting things that's derived out of those initiatives are what patterns were shown or exposed from the model itself. So think about taking a test, and if you had a cheat sheet and you wrote all the answers down, those are the outputs from the model that Ryan's talking about. But the process of a study guide and learning and reading the chapters and understanding the patterns, like that actually provides a lot of value for people. Let's say you're in supply chain or customer service, and the model can expose some of these patterns that maybe weren't very intuitive to you naturally on what you were able to pick up on in terms of patterns. I think explainability and transparency provides an additional layer of benefit other than just a crystal ball prediction of an output. So, and I think that's the conversation a lot of academia is having right now around ChatGPT, is that it gives you outputs, but can you understand why it's giving you that sort of output, and what sources and references can you cite in addition to that?
That's a great point. I just summarized that, auditability is the point you raised earlier, Rehgan, and then advocating accountability. So I think what I'm curious to ask the group here is, how do you feel that roles are going to change as a result of AI based on those 2 points, right? The fact that you can get answers more quickly, certain things can be learned more quickly, but there now needs to be a whole nother level of accountability and auditability in all of those processes. So how do you guys think about just people changing their roles and their job kind of functional split based on some of those tools?
I think when you look at a lot of the regulatory framework around discrimination or like workplace safety and things like that, these are issues that we as humans have always addressed using regulations, right? But what's changing now is that an AI can make these decisions really, really quickly, right? So providing an adequate oversight for that and providing proper regulations around that, which are going to have heavily technological component now, right? Because it's not going to be scalable for human beings to be manually doing the things the same way that they were before. I think that's going to be an important component of it, right? But having said that, I want to temper that with the other side of the equation, like, for example, the kind of industry that Finn is in, or Ryan is in, or I'm in, right? The ethics of it is, we're not thinking about it every day as engineers, right? It's not like our AI is going and manipulating human beings on a social media, right? So there'll be a lot of applications of AI where, this is just another tool in a long array of tools that we have used in our industry, and it's just better and more central purpose, and so we are excited about it. Right?
But can you double click on that, guys? I think that what you just said about the AI used to be the concern is about social media and about manipulating human behavior. It's about voting, polling, media. But there are a lot of jobs that are being created right now by companies like yours right here in the Midwest that people don't know about, that really leverage AI. It's not the thing that is reported on often or as much. And I'd like to just kind of get your take on like what you think what the next 20 years is going to look like in terms of AI being applied to these industries you just talked about, Vijay. I don't know if Ryan or Ben, you guys want to jump in on that.
Well, I mean, one thing off the top is I just think about how the world is used to and has the concept of financial auditors, right? That's pretty standard. Everybody understands that. This world of AI auditing, I think, is something that will probably come around, is that we're going to look for third-party validation of the models for not just accuracy, but for introduction of bias. Everybody's going to have to understand like data and the training sets and what went in the same way that you look at your general ledger to see the sort of accounts payable, accounts receivable, and you want a third party to kind of validate that. And I would guess that there's probably going to be some external value placed on some third-party auditability for both kind of the ethical constraints and the accuracy constraints of AI.
This is something we were talking about yesterday internally. We're in the midst of discussing a new feature on our roadmap related to ADAS, autonomous driving solutions, right? And of course, that's its own conversation, right? ADAS. But we expect there isn't a whole lot of regulation, at least federally, regarding ADAS as of right now. As we look to the future, and this is more specific to RoboTire and those in the automotive industry, but as we look to the future, we expect there to be more regulation. For instance, ADAS calibration, it's not, it's kind of up to the manufacturer to some degree right now, right? The calibration of all the different sensors, all the sensor packages that are included for autonomous driving. So as we look to the future, that's one example of where we expect at least that there will be, I guess, and hope that there would be more regulation put into place in that area. So I expect in areas where significant harm could be put in somebody's way based on a sensor being out of alignment or an ML model being trained poorly or something like that, I expect there will be more regulation put in place. At least that's something that we're planning for internally.
Got it. So I wanted to take a bit of a pivot to talk about talent, and specifically the things that you guys look for in your companies when you're hiring talent. I want to take a lens, assuming and looking at some of the profiles of the people here on the call today. Some of them are interested in working for companies that are going to be generating new technology with AI. And it would be great if everyone was a machine learning specialist with 10 years of experience in your respective fields. But outside of that, like, what advice would you give to someone who is interviewing for a role in one of your companies, specifically when it comes to being ready to kind of jump into a company like yours that's so tech forward? I'll start with Vijay.
Okay, so I think my company is a little bit of a niche in the general scheme of things. I'm going to talk about specifically my company's needs as well as where I see the market for AI headed in future, right? So in my company, we look for people who can have a white box understanding of modeling. What do I mean by that? It's not just important for us to know that some AI solution works. It's important for us to understand why it works and pick it apart and throw out the pieces that are not necessary for it to work and streamline the whole thing, right? Why is that important? Because unlike most of the internet companies, our solutions are not accessible to us once it's out there. They are working in some factory that's not connected to the internet somewhere out in Portland or Korea or Taiwan, right? So in that scenario, we really need to understand what we are shipping, right? So it's very important for us to hire people who are having a real bent towards modeling and mathematics and things like that, right? So that's KLA. We do hire software people as well who can put these things into the solution. But the industry as a whole don't need people with so much specialization, is what I feel, right? If you take large language models right now, in 5 years' time, I expect them to be so easy for everybody to use that to train a large language model will be a skill like training a dog, for example, right? Some people will have it, other people will not have it. And for the people who have it, it will be a very valuable skill for them, right? So I don't think it's going to be like AI jobs are going to be highly technical alone, right? There are going to be few of those jobs, but it's going to be a wide spectrum of skills that are needed in order to operationalize and make use of these systems that are being built. And those are going to be very general purpose skills, because once you know how to train a model for one application, you can use the same skills to train it for another application as well.
And so there's hope for folks that are non-technical to.
I think so. I mean, there'll be a lot more jobs that are non-technical around AI than technical, because the technical jobs are going to be concentrated in a few companies, right? But you need the world to use these solutions, right? So,
right. Yeah. Rehgan, I know you do some work in terms of just diversity in data science and analytics. Tell me a little bit more about your perspective on what you guys look for, what companies are looking for generally when it comes to talent.
Yeah, we see. So you're referring to women in analytics. So I'll just plug that here if people are interested in joining that community with our whole mission, getting more diverse individuals in this space. But a lot of the different jobs that I see sprouting up kind of tangentially. So like one of our partners is an AI lawyer. She's been an AI lawyer for a number of years. She helps companies when there's litigation associated with AI specifically. And so she tracks policy and things like that. I've met tons of ethicists who study kind of the ethical frameworks that companies can adopt to make sure that they're building ethical technology. I am a product person at heart, so I can tell you that AI product management is super, super, super important. And I don't see that role pop up enough. These are people who are somewhat technical and understand the general anatomy of machine learning and the concepts and terminology, aren't hands on keyboard, aren't in Python, aren't modeling anything, but they can translate business needs and user experience of individuals interfacing with these complex systems, and also meet with data scientists and data engineers and architects to ensure that the solution being built is going to be adopted, because that's most of the issue that companies experience is the adoption side. And so product managers are in high demand. Even on the project management side, the work is very different than software development in some aspects. So once the model has been built and you're past kind of the research phase, it's treated somewhat as a software development type life cycle. But pre deployment, there's kind of research spikes, and it's a little bit more ambiguous and a little bit more open-ended as people are embarking on modeling projects. And so project management is a little bit different, looks a little bit different. So that's also an area that people can navigate into. So I see lots of folks, in all different aspects of these kind of tangential elements to help machine learning become valuable and usable, other than just your data scientist or ML engineer or data engineer, which are all important. But those are some other areas that we've seen pop up a lot.
Gotcha.
You don't have to learn Python to be valuable, but learn Python. Right. There's no job by which you having that skill set is not going to make your ability to do that job more valuable, even if it's just the ability to read it, to understand at least the framework or the structure of what is happening in product management jobs, in business and data governance jobs. You're going to run into these opportunities where if you just had that, the world would just be 10% easier, even if it's not 100% of your job. All the jobs are just going to be just 10% easier. If you can just read a little bit of it, it will make the world and the job easier.
Got it. Learn Python or Mojo.
Mojo,
yeah. 35,000 times.
Cut through the chase and jump directly to Mojo.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, this is coming from someone who did learn Python early on in my career. I definitely don't write as much code as I used to, but it does help you understand intimately some of those paradigms that you'll be interfacing with. So when, you're talking about model performance from a compute perspective and there's latency issues, you may not understand all the complicated components of that, but you'll be able to understand the concepts and the paradigms that people are talking about. So yeah, if you're interested, dabbling in that definitely won't hurt.
Right. And I see a little thought bubble from people on the call here that want to ask the question. If you do have a question, please put it into the chat so we can ask our panelists before the call ends. But the question I'm sure people are thinking, as you said that, Ryan, is where should I go if I don't know Python? What are some best practices to learn Python?
Yeah, boy, is this a different answer than I would have given 2 decades ago. Honestly, start on YouTube. Just like the tutorials and videos and stuff that are there for free that make it super easy to learn the basics. You don't even have to pick up a book. Just watch a couple YouTube videos, get your feet wet in that space, and then you can move on to other things and get books and do tutorials. And there's a bunch of really cool things that lots of companies have built to help you learn. But a handful of YouTube videos really do kind of get you from 0 to 1 pretty fast in an engaging to learn way that's absolutely free.
Got it. Finn, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I do. I think that I agree fully with Ryan on that point. I think a lot of the programs are super helpful for learning Python or other programming languages. But in my opinion, when I want to learn a new programming language, or when I was starting late high school, early college, I found something that I was interested in developing. I started with actually a Bluetooth low energy scanner on a Raspberry Pi. I was like, I want to build something off of that. And I studied the documentation and the different libraries I was going to be working with, and then kind of sunk my teeth into that. But I mean, you just got to find what works best for you. For me, I wanted to find something that I was interested in developing and actually learn the language. But I mean, to learn some of the fundamentals, you have to start from step one for sure.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I think you brought a good point that I shared with a friend who was exploring some of the new AI tools that are out there now that are powered by some of these, Chat GPT. And it was just whatever you wanted to do, that was your passion. You have such a great opportunity now to learn about it so much more quickly. So let go of the fear, right? Let's step into the future. It's here. It's now. Two, connect with the thing that you really want to do, what your passion is, again, and think about how you can leverage AI and leverage some of the new tools that are out there to learn it. So that's a great point, Finn. Thanks for bringing that back. So we have about 10 more minutes left. I'm going to ask again if there are questions from the audience that you ask us now. So we'll try to incorporate that. I'm going to ask everybody to give everyone a chance to maybe share the things that we didn't ask. So kind of your, what do you want to share with the audience about you, your company, what you guys are doing, or just points of view on some of the topics that we've discussed. I want to give everybody at least 2.5 minutes to do that. So we'll close out that way with kind of final thoughts. I'll let whoever wants to go first volunteer.
I'll start. I think as we were talking about, the roles and responsibilities of individuals inside of companies are shifting, and this takes an extraordinary amount of change management, and it starts from the top, in my opinion. So I'm thinking of these like non-digital native companies that are trying to make this significant transition. From what I've seen, the more knowledgeable executives and the boards are of those companies, the better of a strategy they create when thinking about the implication of this company-wide. So education is super, super important, getting people to recognize patterns for good use cases, feasible use cases. I'd say you had mentioned all the tools flooding the market right now in the AI space. The developer tools are really interesting, and I think there's been a lot of work that has started a number of years ago that is coming to fruition and gaining in a lot of popularity, which is great. But there's tons and tons of highly verticalized tools that are leveraging AI that are probably not at a maturity level to leverage at the moment. And so if you are a business leader or an executive at a company, I think it's really important for you to seek out individuals inside of your organization who are very knowledgeable about machine learning and use them to kind of guide and coach on how to evaluate some of these tools. Because odds are you have a team that's focused on the problem before, or done some initial research before, or have looked at data sets to solve that problem before. And you don't want to start from zero, and you don't want to bring yet another tool into your ecosystem that you might not have a ton of confidence around. So I just wanted to bring up those pieces, because those two areas are brought up again and again and again on calls that I have with senior leaders at these companies. And AI literacy or acumen is coming up more and more, where it's just kind of educating people in the organization about the basics of it.
So where do they go to get that education? Like if you're on the board of a company, you're at a company, you want the business to get more insight on how to apply governance and best practices to what they're doing. What are some of the resources that people can use?
I'm going to plug our company, AlignAI, because we do that. So we have tons of playbooks that help organizations put their standards in place. And there is a very significant educational component to that. There's also tons of resources online too. I personally follow a lot of very specific individuals in the field that I think do a really good job of communicating what's happening in a very, consumable way. Like Cassie Kozyrkov, who's the chief decision scientist at Google. She's incredible. Noelle Silver, who just spun up the generative AI practice at Accenture. These are some pretty incredible women who have made significant contributions to the industry for a number of years. And so I would find reputable individuals who have been in this space for more than 6 months, first and foremost, and then individuals who are able to kind of communicate the impact of some of the activity that's happening in the industry.
Gotcha. To add a question from the audience, Ryan, you had mentioned a point about job loss due to AI and that being a bit of a misnomer in some ways. And the question was, what do you think has prevented AI and machine learning from replacing certain labor even a decade ago? An example being fintech, where there's a lot of money being put into AI and machine learning, but still, obviously, a lot of people at work in those fields still. So that may be a question you can help us answer as you give us your closing thoughts.
Yeah, I think about it a couple of ways, and not the least of which is data is now very big and very cheap. Compute is now very big and very cheap. So every problem space is getting faster and cheaper to solve in that world every single year. And at some point, you just sort of crest over a hill where it becomes economically feasible to dive into it. So there are a couple of those problems where we've just kind of crested the economic hill where it actually makes business sense to solve the problem at that particular economic scale. The other part is I think that the technology in the space is relatively new enough, both for people who are trying to do it and for businesses. They don't even think about applying this tool set to that world, or they don't think about the, like, as Rehgan said, kind of the AI product management of how do I actually use this to affect my business in a different or positive way, because it was so niche and so difficult maybe to enter. And I think we're seeing that a little bit more now that more businesses are kind of crossing into that world. Mark Andreessen wrote a really pivotal article that stuck with me years and years ago called "Software is Eating the World," like very, very fundamental kind of thought leadership piece about how every company is a software company. Every company is going to become an AI company in that same way. And so that introduction is now front and center where people just hadn't thought about it before, and now they are.
That's awesome. It's a great book to read, everybody. Vijay or Finn, what you?
Yeah. My thought on this is I'll keep it a little bit more specific to RoboTire, but in regards to why what we're doing hasn't taken a hold earlier than it has, right? It's not because like compute resources have been available for long enough to make this happen, right? But for our specific use case, there wasn't a camera on the market 10 years ago that could collect data in an accurate enough way in a 3D space and deal well enough with light reflections all over the place to actually make this happen. Maybe we had cameras good enough to train a model on it, but in a super variable environment, apply that model against that camera data that you're applying the ML model against, and you're gonna have some bad results. So I think it's largely a hardware issue, kind of like Ron was saying. I also think it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg problem too, right? Because, for example, the camera we use a Zivid camera, like I mentioned. Zivid wouldn't have had a reason to put all the money and time into designing their product, this camera that is used only really in machine learning applications, if there weren't already the other machine learning resources there to do it in the first place. So the guys on the hardware side weren't there, and the guys on the software side weren't there, and who's gonna put all the money into it first?
Gotcha. Good point. All right, that's great points, guys. Vijay, would you mind closing this out with your closing thoughts?
Yeah, so let me just state something that Ryan just mentioned about how every company is going to be a software company, right? There was another comment which is very similar, which said software is going to eat the world, right? But there's an interesting dynamic to software that has always played, right? When you think about computer industry as a whole and semiconductors, they have become cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper all our lives, right? But that's not been true with software, right? Because human beings need to write it. So software has stayed as a fairly expensive thing to create, right? And that's why most of the companies that are successful are companies that have extremely large scale, like a Google or a Facebook. These are companies that can hire a lot of very expensive software engineers, but they deploy it at a scale where there are billions of users, so it makes sense to spend that much money, right? Now, imagine that AI can now make software engineering so much easier. And we create the same kind of deflationary economics in software that we have in hardware, right? Where software becomes so much more easier and accessible. Everybody can create their own thing. What does that do for our economy, right? So I think that's the great opportunity that's going to be available. And as I said, this is not just, there are going to be a few people who are going to be creating those tools that make software engineering easier. But most people can use those tools to make everybody's lives better, right? So I think to some extent, it's going to be an enormous opportunity for everybody. And I hope that's what comes to pass.
Thank you, Vijay. That's a perfect thought to close us out on. It actually makes me want to do another hour with you guys to think about that. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining. So I learned a lot. I hope everyone here learned a ton. Thank you to Purpose Jobs for hosting this talk, and hopefully you guys have a good rest of your day. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining.
Thanks so much.
You.
Thank you, Jibreel.
Thanks, Jibreel.
Bye now.